Why didn't you turn down an offer to do a polygraph?
And that's what started me down this rabbit hole, because Richard Allen not wanting to take the polygraph is obviously an admission of guilt, or some sort of act of self-preservation. Generally speaking, that is the common belief among our society. If you're not going to take the polygraph, you clearly did this. And I am constantly reassessing my perspective on this story and my stance in this particular case. And this is a common comment that comes up in my videos and others. If Richard Allen was innocent, why didn't he take the polygraph? So is there a logical explanation? Is there any validity to polygraphs in general? What does his defense attorney say? And is there any merit to it? All that being said, everything's alleged. Welcome to the point. Let's get to it.
Before you got involved in the case, Holman says he was offered a polygraph and turned it down.
There's more to that, but to give everybody a general overview and make sure we're all on the same page, let's go to the Carroll County comment. Allen was offered a polygraph but refused. When I asked about a polygraph, he said, "No, I'm not going to help you." I asked that a couple of times before Kathy came in the room. I said, "We either find evidence to help people prove they are innocent or guilty. Let us help you." Allen protested, saying he had anxiety, so Holman said he explained that the test is performed by finding a baseline that would account for that. And that's not necessarily accurate, and we'll get to that in a second. I asked Kathy, if you were innocent, would you take a polygraph? And she said, yes, I would. That's when he stood up towards the end of the interview. All that was redacted from what the jury saw. At the end of the interview, Holman said Allen stood and cursed at him, yelling because he was upset that his wife was in tears. Allen then stretched out his arms, placed his wrists together, telling Holman to arrest him. He would not cooperate, he said. He would not allow us to search his phone or get his DNA. He made us get warrants for it. And we're asking the question today, is there a valid reason for this? Or did Richard Allen know he was guilty and he was going to do anything and everything he could to make it difficult on law enforcement? With all that and the inconsistent statements from him and his wife, there's a load of irony to the fact that he mentioned Richard Allen gave inconsistent statements when they did the same, but that's for another video. And the other comment where he said, "I'm not like other people. I care about what people think of me. And what kind of good person passes two girls?" He just didn't act like an innocent man. And how do you know if he was acting like an innocent man given the technique you used to interrogate Richard Allen? And there's more to that in this video as well, but let's see what his attorney said in response to this particular question.
Well, here's the thing that my clients tell me when they're offered polygraphs and they don't take them. I have mental health issues. I'm nervous. And by the way, do you trust Jerry Holman?
Pay attention.
Do you trust the police? I mean, Jerry brought him over there on October 26th when he asked for the polygraph under false pretenses. He went over there, Rick did, because they had held on to his car, and he needed the car, so he went over there. And, they were going to arrest him. They say that they weren't, but that's just outrageous. And so I wouldn't have trusted those guys for a polygraph for my life, especially if I have mental health, depression and stuff, and I have to worry about whether that's going to be a false positive or a false negative. So
if you are suffering from issues mentally, is there any validity to this particular statement? Will this type of problem cause your polygraph to be read incorrectly? Well, a simple 5-minute Google search, since that's a valid thing now, will tell you that that is absolutely correct. Not only is that correct, that is one of the primary reasons these things are not allowed in court as evidence. They're not considered factual. They're not considered accurate. There's a big misconception to the validity of polygraphs and how accurate they are. But keep in mind, Holman is being hostile to Richard Allen. Like I said, there was a ton more to that particular interaction. And let's see what an actual doctor says about the misconceptions and issues with polygraphs.
Now, despite the popularity of lie detector tests in popular culture, there are many critiques that have gone on for decades. For one thing, as I'll show in the scientific literature, they're not very accurate at all.
They're absolutely not accurate.
In fact, they're quite biased against the innocent.
That's key to this whole video. That's key to this particular side of the argument, to see if Richard Allen was doing some sort of act of self-preservation or he was generally concerned. Polygraphs can make innocent people feel guilty if they're suffering from something mentally. But there's more to this. Pay attention.
Although they may catch many liars, there are many people who are not lying who are falsely accused of lying.
Being falsely accused is a key factor to a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
There are examples of people who are accused of crimes based on failing lie detector tests, even though they were actually innocent. Also, the test is susceptible to what are known as countermeasures or intentional efforts to beat the test. For example, you could try to increase your reaction to the control questions. For instance, you might bite your tongue or curl your toes tightly in order to increase your heart rate. You may intentionally pause your breathing in response to a control question so that your reaction to the critical question does not seem as severe in comparison. Also, it's true that some people confess voluntarily when subjected to a lie detector test, but some of these confessions are false, and the false confession phenomenon, although unusual, is known to occur when someone is bullied into a confession, especially when they're pressured after being told that they failed a lie detector test.
So in its entirety, it can elicit false confessions, and stress, anxiety, and depression will alter how that test is read. And when bullied, it can elicit false confessions. So is that something Richard Allen was worried about? He was known to have stuff going on with his mental health. He said it in this interview. His wife had mentioned it and the attorneys had mentioned it. It was well documented. It was so well documented it even came up during his treatment in Westville, which is its own bizarre rabbit hole at the end of the day. But here's what Richard Allen's attorney Jennifer said when talking about the polygraph and the position Richard Allen was in.
If I'm being interrogated by an individual who tells me that a bullet from my gun is at the scene, and I know that neither I or my gun have ever been there, and he tells me that they have scientists who know that it's my voice on that video, and I know I'm not on the video, and they have scientists who say that that is me on the video, and I know I'm not on the video.
And those are lies, by the way.
Right.
Now, I don't personally agree with the idea that law enforcement can lie to a potential suspect or an innocent person, but when you do it, it's an absolute crime. But there is a reason Holman was lying. In fact, there's a very particular reason Holman was lying. And remember what was said by that doctor about being bullied, eliciting false confessions, and stress, and all these sorts of things.
There's no scientists that said that, yeah.
There's a string of lies that Jerry Holman said to Rick Allen on the 26th. You know, if they can make up that evidence, how are they going to skew a polygraph?
So you just heard her. If they can make all this stuff, how would they skew a polygraph? But why would they skew a polygraph? Why would Holman intentionally lie to Richard Allen? A lot of this isn't being talked about in the mainstream media, but the interrogation technique used on Richard Allen was called the Reed technique. And for those of y'all who don't know, this is what the Reed technique is.
The Reed technique is a widely used method of police interrogation in the U.S., and it was developed by John E. Reed in the 1940s, and it's been a dominant approach in law enforcement for many years. And it starts with the presumption that the person you're talking to is guilty.
Guilt-based interrogation tactics. So is there validity to what they're saying? If the interrogator is using and twisting everything you say to make you sound guilty, is that not something that will cause a trust issue between the interrogator and the interrogatee, if that's a word? And would that lack of trust cause increased stress? Is that something that could adversely affect somebody who's already dealing with mental health problems?
So it's designed to elicit confessions from individuals suspected of committing a crime. It involves a structured psychological approach to questioning with the goal of getting the suspect to confess to the alleged offense. And the technique relies on the assumption that certain behavioral cues can indicate deception, and it includes various tactics to assess and exploit those clues. But here's the problem with that. Many of the clues and cues that are in the Reed technique don't necessarily mean that somebody's being deceptive. In fact, in studies, they found that police officers are no better than a flip of the coin in determining whether or not someone is lying.
So in totality, is there a valid reason for Richard Allen to not want to take that polygraph? When you consider the Reed technique was used on Richard Allen and the fact that that particular technique has in several states been banned when dealing with either the young or the elderly or anybody who is suffering with issues with their mental health because it elicits false confessions. It is designed and geared to elicit confessions from people by twisting their own words and psychological manipulation. So in totality, does it seem like Richard Allen was avoiding this polygraph because he was trying to do some sort of act of self-preservation, or he knew he did it and he didn't want to be found guilty? Or was he genuinely nervous and confused? A lot of what he says has been twisted in the media, and it was twisted at trial. But after hearing all that in totality, does that make you reevaluate your position on Richard Allen? Does him not taking the polygraph mean he was guilty? Or he refused to take that polygraph because he knew he was going to be caught? Or does the stress of the situation, given the technique used to interrogate him, and like I said, this wasn't a quick 5-minute interrogation, but did all that stress compound, make him more stressed, fire up his anxiety, and he knew if he took a polygraph, it was probably going to give some sort of wrong information? Or if he gave a polygraph, he knew that law enforcement was going to try to twist and manipulate that to make him seem more guilty. I'm not personally buying the fact that him not taking the polygraph is an admission of guilt, especially considering all these external factors. Like I said, there is way more to the story than what's being reported in the mainstream press. And there are logical, rational, valid explanations to a lot of this stuff floating around online. And if there are logical, rational explanations to what's floating around online, does that not mean there is reasonable doubt? We know that law enforcement will twist and manipulate things to get you to the police station so they can get you in an interrogation room. In fact, the last prominent case floating around on social media before this one was the Sarah Boone story, and they used a similar technique on her. Now, the big difference, in my own unprofessional opinion, is Sarah Boone was absolutely guilty. But the big difference between that trial and this one is that one was transparent. Law enforcement seemed to do a valid job. They had all the evidence laid out. They laid out that evidence to the jury, and they laid it out well. I'm not seeing those elements in Richard Allen's situation. If it's a guilt-based interrogation technique, how does that not compound stress? There is a real possibility that the vast majority of us, when placed in that situation, even if we had never been to the town of Delphi, would have come up failing that particular polygraph when asked, "Were you there? Did you attack these 2 girls?" Now, as always, if you see any of these things differently, you can let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this and a more fair, open conversation, maybe check one of these videos out. Y'all be safe now.